Hi everybody, I'm starting my class this week, Parashat Pinchas, right over here on the ancient archaeological site on Itamar over here on right above our neighborhood, one of our older neighborhoods of the community. And I want to talk about this week's portion, about a special plant that grows over here in Itamar and that many other places in Israel. And it's mentioned, it's hinted to in this week's portion, and we're going to talk about that. But before we actually sit down at my desk and give you the whole class, I want to begin outdoors over here and show you. Right now, pointing to this beautiful plant, and here, this is the Zlaf tree right here growing. Now, usually it flowers from now until September time. Very beautiful flowers, and the flowers change all the time. So, right now we're just seeing flowers that sort of are drying up over here, as you could see, and the flower eventually turns into a fruit called an evion. Looks like a little pickle, and here's one of the fruits. So you can actually, this is a thorny caper, and you see over here I'm trying to get to it, but I'm getting thorned. And there it is. You see that thing looks like a little pickle, a little cucumber over there, and that's called the evion in Hebrew, the evionot. And it's very interesting. In Jewish law, there are different things regarding this plant. Number one, what blessing to make over it, and in reality, if we consider this a tree, so we have to make ha'etz. To be considered a vegetable, we make adama. And so that's a question brought down in Jewish law. And number two, the question is if it's considered a tree, so then we have to wait 3 years before we're allowed to eat the fruit. And we wouldn't be able to allow to eat it right away. So first we have to know what we eat of it. So first of all, I'll show you, there are a couple of things that we eat. Number one, if here's another one growing, you see that the pickle there looks like a cucumber. So those are called the evionot. I said here's more in the back over there. You see them growing, hanging off the tree. Those are called the evionot. So that's the major fruit of this Zlaf, the caper tree. But in addition, the flowers, you see the flowers here. These flowers, these buds basically, a little further away, let me try to get a little closer here. Now I'm actually showing you the buds. The buds over here are pickled. And there's a famous great Tana, one of the Tanaim of Israel. He's known as Rabbi Capparis, and he actually is buried, he has a synagogue from the famous synagogue in the Golan Heights, and he was, by profession, they're called the Capparis. Why? Because they take the kafusin, they take these buds and they pickle them, and they're extremely like a delicatesse. They're very, very tasty and pickled. So that's very common. A lot of people know about that when you're eating the caper. But besides those two edible parts, which is, again, the bud, and also the fruit itself. As I said before, the pickles, they look like pickles. There's one other thing that's edible, and those are the young branches that are coming out. They can actually eat the leaves. They eat those young branches that are coming out. So that, I don't see any now because it's all surrounded by thorns, but they're very, very sometimes, these young parts here, new little, see these very soft shoots coming out. They're also edible, by the way. Oh, here we see one of the flowers. Now when you see they're flowering, there's the flower, actually here you can see the flower, there we go. Those beautiful flowers. It has that crimson color, that royal color to it, that purple, and here we see the buds opening up to more flowers. It usually flowers towards the afternoon, they open up nicely, and they open and close, and they're very quick to come in and out. And now I'm going to go back into my office where I'm going to do the class today. I'm going to go back into my little room there, I call it, and I will tell you exactly what the connection of this plant, the caper, is to the portion of the week. Hey, I just got in from the outside. We saw the beautiful caper. We saw how it grows. And now we are going to relate some messages about the portion of the week, Parashat Pinchas, that relate to this caper tree, this caper plant, as our continuation of the botany of the land of Israel, the beautiful things that grow here naturally in our surroundings. I do want to mention this portion. I want to name and make in the name of those 2 soldiers that fell this week in defending our country. A terrible, tragic week, and not to mention the terrible attack in Tel Aviv and the attack just 2 weeks ago in Eli, and all the terrible attacks that have been going on in Israel for many, many months already, and we're in a situation, a war situation over here. So we need to pray, and we need to remember those brave people that are giving their lives for the land of Israel. And this portion, I think, will connect to that concept as well. And I want to open up by, again, as I mentioned, the caper tree, the daughters of Tzlofchad, and that's going to be our topic for today, and actually talking more about, well, both the father of the daughter of Tzlofchad together with the daughters of Tzlofchad. And if we look in our portion in chapter 27, verses 1 to 5, it says that the daughters of Tzlofchad ben Chefer ben Gilad, the daughters of Tzlofchad, the son of Chefer from, son of Gilad, from Machir, from the tribe of Menashe, really, of course, Ben Yosef, the son of Yosef, Joseph. The daughters were named, there were 5 daughters. Machla, Noah, the Chogla, Umilka, Vitirza, the 5 daughters. And they came before Moshe Rabbeinu, and they said, our father died in the desert, and they weren't part of the sin of Korach, because they died in their sin, and they didn't have sons. And they said, why should we lose an opportunity of inheriting, inheritance from our father, and we would like that to receive that inheritance. So Moshe Rabbeinu took this judgment before God, and we all know they were ruled in God rules in favor of the daughters of Tzlofchad. There's a law now in the Torah that the daughters will inherit the father. If there are no sons, they inherit the father. So that's really the opening, regarding the daughters of Tzlofchad, the opening section over here. And a couple of questions. And number one, we have to realize when the daughters come along and they say their father died in, they weren't part of the congregation of Korach, but they died in his sin. They're strengthening he died in his sin. And what does that mean? Ki b'chet'o, in his sin he died. What are they referring to? So it's very interesting. The Talmud has a discussion regarding what exactly the sin was that he died. And I'd like to bring down that small section of Talmud which relates to the sin of Tzlofchad. And in reality, there are 2 opinions in the Talmud. It's an argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda. And I'm going to bring that down right now. Tanu Rabbana, our rabbis teach us, Mekoshesh zet Tzlofchad. Mekoshesh means the one who gathered, and referring to the one who gathered wood on Shabbat. That goes back to, if we look in the portion of Shalach, it's brought down at the end of the portion of Shalach, chapter 15, verse number 32. It's verse number 32 in chapter 15. It says, Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar, the children of Israel were in the desert, Vayimtzeu ish mekoshesh etzim b'yom Shabbat, and they found a man that was gathering trees on Shabbat. Now, who was this particular man that was gathering trees on Shabbat? That's exactly what the Talmud is talking about now in the Tractate of Shabbat 86b, and that's what I was reading to now, so I'm going to go back to that. So the Talmud says, Mekoshesh Tzlofchad, the person who's gathering the trees, this refers to Tzlofchad, V'chein hu omer, and it says, Vayu b'nei Yisrael b'midbar, the children of Israel in the desert. Vayimtzu ish, and they found the person gathering the trees. Ulahalanu omer, and afterwards it says, Avinu made b'midbar, father died in the desert. So there's a certain kind of learning in the Talmud when we make comparisons over similar words. So the way it says the word desert regarding the person who gathers the wood, and the way it said over here, the word desert regarding the daughters of Tzlofchad, when they came to Moshe Rabbeinu asking for inheritance. So we learn from that Tzlofchad was the one who gathered the trees. He's the one who profaned the Sabbath. And he's the one who was punished by stoning. And that is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Amalo Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, he answers him and he says, Akiva, ben kach ben kach atati litenet. Then he goes, nevertheless, you're going to, in the future, have to pay the price for revealing this name. Im kidvarecha, right? And he goes, if it's what you're saying, haTorah kisatu, the Torah hid the fact that this was Tzlofchad, the father of the daughters of Tzlofchad. And you're coming around and you're revealing he was the one who gathered the wood in the desert, who was punished by stoning. And it's saying if it's not true, so actually you're just motzi la'azal oto tzaddik, you're just talking lashon hara, evil talk about a righteous man. The Talmud goes on to say, so what is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera? So his opinion is that we don't learn the Gzerah. We don't learn out from the word Bamidbar in both places. But he's saying, who was he from? He says, he revealed something else very interesting. He said he was Vayapilu. He was part of the Mapilim. The Mapilim, if we recall, were those, and the portion of Shalach, that after Israel sinned with the spies and all that, there was a group that wanted to repent, and they decided to try to go up, and Moshe Rabbeinu said, don't do it, because if you go up, you're going to be killed. You're not going to be successful. God is not with you. And they went up anyway, and they were killed by the Amalek. So here, Rabbi Yehuda is revealing that he actually was one of the Mapilim. He was one of those that tried to make it to the land of Israel and rectify what was done before but wasn't successful. So those are the two opinions. Of course, in both opinions, it wasn't obviously in accordance with what was supposed to be done, because the first opinion, obviously, was he profaned the Sabbath. In the second opinion, it's a lighter thing, but he still was told not to try to go up. Don't attempt to go to the land. You're not going to be successful now after the sin of the spies. But nevertheless, he did so, and he was punished. So that is the source of where we see there's an argument over what exactly happened over here. What exactly did Tzlofchad do? But in reality, and the commentaries bring down, there's no way in the world that Tzlofchad, the father of the 5 daughters, would have done something so seriously grave and for the meaning of just sinning against God. That doesn't make sense. And especially the fact that the daughter's stressing, then if you look at the verse very carefully, what we read before, they say that he died in his sin. Right? Their father died in his sin, and they said he wasn't part of Korach. He wasn't part of that group that came and tried to rebel against Moshe Rabbeinu. So they were saying it was something much lighter than that, than the rebellion. It was something different. So he had a goal in mind when he sinned, when he gathered up the wood. And the question, what was his goal in mind? And the sources bring down, and the commentaries talk about it, that his idea was after the sin of the spies. So people had despaired, and they thought that no longer the commandments were again applied to them anymore, since they're not going to enter the land of Israel. And he wanted to go out and show that, God forbid, that the commandments are 100% applicable even in the desert, even when they're not going to make it to the land of Israel, and person has to abide by the Sabbath and Shabbat. So we call this in Hebrew a mitzvah lishma. An aveira lishma. He did a sin. He did a sin, but for a good reason. He wanted to teach the people of Israel, and to do a sin that would bring an everlasting lesson to Israel about the importance of Shabbat. So he sort of sacrificed himself for that purpose. And that is why he sinned, not for the God forbid, rebel against God. And which is extremely interesting understanding. And if anyone knows a little bit more details about the laws of Shabbat, so there's a question. Why would even if he's doing it for something like that, but why would he, how could he profane against Shabbat, which is the most important thing in the world? It's equivalent to all the commandments in the Torah. And the answer is the Marsha, one of the commentaries and other explanations like the Chidah, they bring down a beautiful explanation. And we all know the laws of Shabbat. The law is that a malacha she'enat tzricha legufa. If a person does a certain kind of labor on Shabbat, but they're not doing the labor for reasons of wanting to use, what the labor they did, the result, but they're doing it for a different result, it's not considered really a Torah prohibition. It's only rabbinical. And I'll give you an example. For example, the classic example brought down by the Talmud, if someone digs a hole in the ground and he wants to use he doesn't want to use the hole he's digging, but he wants to use the dirt that he takes out of the hole. So the whole purpose of digging wasn't for the sake of making a hole, but it was for the dirt. That's considered a malacha she'enat tzricha legufa, and therefore he's not obligated by a Torah prohibition, only by rabbinical. Or if a person, for example, drags a very, very big bench on the ground and he's plowing the ground, but he's not interested in plowing the ground. He's interested, of course, just in moving the bench from one place to the other. So therefore, when he plowed, it's not considered plowing on Shabbat. So therefore, when Tzlofchad went ahead and he did what he did, when he gathered the wood for the sake of teaching Israel, not for he didn't need the wood. But why was he punished then by the death penalty? The answer is because when the witnesses came, and that's how it works, the judges go by the witnesses. The witnesses testified that he gathered the wood and he took the wood for himself. In other words, he used the wood. So, but they weren't able to read his heart and know that he did that for other reasons. But so that's how they explain. And we see for the verse that it really, obviously, the Torah hints very strongly that here this was an avira lishma, it was a sin done for a reason. And we see other places in the Torah, we don't have to go far for examples. Tamar, right? We all know Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah in the Bible, that she goes ahead and she dresses up as a harlot and she has relations with her father-in-law, which is obviously prohibited. And she goes ahead and she gets pregnant with a child. And the whole purpose was to continue, to bring the next generation forward. As we know, Messiah comes out of that. So she, of course, had good intentions by the whole thing, but nevertheless, there was a sin that was connected to it. But it was an avera lishma. And there are other examples. Yael, as we all know, in the book of Judges in the Bible, the Tanakh, the story when she goes ahead and kills Sisera. And we all know that she first gave him milk and she lied with him. So that, again, is a prohibition. But it wasn't done for the reasons of God forbid, a sexual crime. She did it in order to kill this evil man. And we see the story of Queen Esther the same way when she approaches Achashverosh and she says, until now he called her to be with her. But now she went to him when Mordechai told her that he needs her help. So she went to him. And when she went to him, that was an avera lishma. So these are different examples where, as we know, it says in the Bible, in the Talmud, Gadol avera lishma, ki mitzvah shelo lishma, right? When someone does an avera lishma, it's for surely like doing a commandment when someone does a commandment with not good intentions, or doesn't really have his heart in it. So avera lishma is a high level in a certain way. A person has to be very, very careful when that goes on, obviously, and we see here it cost the life of Zlaf. But nevertheless, that the Talmud and the Bible is hinting to that. The Talmud doesn't learn something without having a huge hint to it, and to bring down, to bring us to enlighten us in this understanding teaching. But we do see the other side is Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, who says that he was part of the Mapilim who went to the land of Israel. And although they were told, don't do it now, you're not going to succeed, and they went ahead. So it was a similar kind of thing. He wanted to show how the love of the land of Israel. Now, what I want to continue with this whole thing here, we have to just explain to the two sides regarding Zlaf Chad, but now we want to connect it to the plant I was talking about. Zlaf Chad in Hebrew, if you listen very carefully to the word Zlaf Chad, it has the word Zlaf in it. Zlaf referring to the caper tree. Chad means it's very sharp. We know that there are different types of capers, and a very common one is the one that has thorns. Chad means thorns. It's hard. It's very, very thorny. And the Talmud talks about, it's really interesting, is a Talmudic expression brought down by the name of Reish Lakish regarding the tzalaf, where it's mentioned, this kind of plant. And what does the Talmud say? It says that we know that there are different kinds of things. There are a few different kinds of things that have, that have brazenness. And it talks about Israel amongst the nations, right? I can bring it down, it's brought down in the tractate of Beitzah, page 25, and it says there are three brazen things. One is Israel amongst the nations, one is a dog amongst the animals, and a chicken amongst the birds. Those are the three things that are certain brazenness. And then it says, others, they add on A's, which is a goat amongst the animal, again, amongst the domesticated animals. And they add on the tzalaf in Ilanot, the tzalaf tree, the caper tree, as far as plants. And now what makes the caper such a tree like this? Why is it called an az tree, the caper? Well, if we think about Zlaf Chad, that he has this certain kind of quality of being very, very, brazen and doing certain things, pushing forward. If he was part of the Mapilim that wanted to enter the land of Israel, they were told not to go. Or the thing about Shabbat, to teach Israel a lesson. He had a mesilat nefesh, a tremendous desire to give over himself for the sake of others, to teach. And that his daughters received that same quality from him, which follows this. Now, but why is it the tree itself reflect that? Well, it has these thorns, and it grows in crazy places. It grows out of nicks and crannies. And if you look at the wall, the western wall in Jerusalem, you see it growing out of the wall. That's what's growing there. These tzalaf trees, and they grow in all kinds of places where you'd think it's impossible, or suddenly popping out. And here, the one I showed you here in the beginning of this video, you can actually see where it's growing. It just comes out, it just pops out of the ground, and it's even very green, even in the summertime when everything dries up. So it has this very powerful green color. And also the flowers in here, the picture I showed you weren't so clear of the flowers, because I said they really blossom in the afternoon. But when they open up and they have this crimson royal color to them, they're really very powerful. And so they reflect that brazenness. Also, they have that the fact that they give fruit. Like every day another flower comes out, and it's really a fascinating, what's the word I'm using for? A fascinating part of the way God created the nature of this tree, how every day others come out, you got to pick them, you pick as I said, the Capparis, which are the buds, or when the fruit comes out, it looks like the pickles or the cucumbers, as we said before. So that really connects very, very with this whole concept. And I want to bring now a story. There's a fascinating story that connects with this whole thing, which you mentioned. The Talmud in the tract of Shabbat, page 150b, brings down a story of a chassid, a very righteous man, that what happened was on Shabbat, his fence broke, and there was a hole in his fence. And he wanted to, was thinking about how he has to close his fence up, and he has to fix this thing on the Shabbat, and he almost forgot it was Shabbat. And then he remembered, oh my goodness, it's Shabbat. And so he, after that story, and he was so broken that he almost actually fixed his fence on Shabbat, or the fact that he thought about fixing his fence on Shabbat. There are different ways of understanding that. He decided that to never fix his fence. He goes, his love for Shabbat was so powerful, and that the fact that it even crossed his mind that even, let's say we take the opinion that it was, he came to the fence and he saw it on Shabbat, and he actually thought about weekday things. On Shabbat we don't want to think about the weekday. So he said, after Shabbat's over, I got to fix my fence. And he didn't like the fact that on Shabbat, instead of thinking about holy things, he was thinking about a mundane, regular workday thing. So he decided that I'm not going to ever fix that hole in my fence, and I'm going to leave it be until for time immemorial, because in honor of Shabbat. And a miracle took place, and a Zlaf tree grew in that area, and actually his whole family, he was able to support his family from that Zlaf tree. Now it's really fascinating because the Zlaf tree has the different edible parts, as I mentioned before, and as I mentioned also, Rabbi Azara Kapal, Rabbi Eliezer Kapal, there are different ways of saying his name, who lived in the Golan Heights in his Beit Midrash. He actually would take the cup. He was a kapal, meaning he was a caper man, and he dealt with them. He would gather them, pickle them, and sell them. He also used it to make medicine, and it's called yain kafrisin, wine made out of it as well. So he was an expert in that, and that's how this man, this chassid, would make his living. Now, it's brought down in the Shla Kodesh, one of the great Kabbalistic masters. He's saying this chassid mentioned in the Talmud was a reincarnation of Tzlofchad. That you see here how there's no doubt that Tzlofchad definitely didn't have evil intentions when he did his sin when he gathered on Shabbat. Why? Because here we see that he rectified, the love of Shabbat even by a thought. So, in other words, here this man, what did he do? He just thought about fixing his fence after Shabbat, or he almost forgot. Let's say other people almost forgot it was Shabbat. It was just a slight mistake, but he was so broken from it. And it shows that the same way rectifies the sin of Tzlofchad, who meant, of course, everything he meant was only for the sake of heaven and to do the right thing, but nevertheless he fell over there, and that's why he came back as this righteous man, this chassid, and was able to rectify that sin of Tzlofchad, which was a fascinating account brought down by the Talmud over here, which is really an important point to mention. I think we discussed most of the some of the connections that relate to the portion in Tzlofchad, but I want to mention one more thing, and I found this. I was doing a little research, and I just came across someone wrote an article, a very interesting article about the Tzlofchad and all that, and it was brought down, and I wanted to stress a little bit more about, as I mentioned before, Rabbi Eliezer Kapal, who was again, his profession was to deal with to gather the salaf and make his living from that at all. That's how he made his living from it. And whatever it was, it brought my attention to look into the archaeological research regarding what they found. Rabbi Eliezer Kapal, and it's brought down something fascinating, a fascinating thing. And it says, as we know, Rabbi Eliezer Kapal, one of his teachings are that a person, I'd like to see if I can find his teaching. I brought it down from Avot Rabbi Natan. Avot Rabbi Natan is like the ethics of our fathers. It's similar, and he writes something very, very interesting. And I want to quote what he writes regarding his understanding. And this is what it says. Rabbi Eliezer Kapal Omer, Al te k'mashkof elyon she'ein yad b'nei adam yichola lagiga ba. Person shouldn't be like a mashkof. Mashkof refers to like a door, the post that's over the door. In those days, had these beautiful posts with decorations and all that on the posts. And he said, don't be like that when a person can't touch it. In other words, a person shouldn't be arrogant, keeping a distance from people, like a high post and no one can go near you. And he says, don't. And then he goes on to say, finally, and he says, but a person should be like a iskupa tachtona, like a lower, when a person enters the house, the threshold of the house that everyone steps on. And he's saying that particular post, when a whole building is destroyed, that always remains, the floor remains, and it's fascinating that they found the upper post of his yeshiva, Beit Midrash. It's the only archaeological finding that it says the word Beit Midrash on it. And on it, it says his name. This is the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Eliezer Kapal. As we all know, we all visited that in the Golan Heights, in Daboria, in the Golan. But what's fascinating, that did survive. But his teaching is so powerful. And why does it connect to the Kapal, as we're talking about the whole story of the caper trees? Because his name, I said, was Kapal. So I wanted to mention that fascinating teaching. And as a matter of fact, I mentioned to you, we were out there looking at it and we're actually looking at it out there, right before we gave this lesson on our Tel, archaeological hilltop right behind my house over here in Itamar, which is fascinating, the findings over there. So anyway, this is, to summarize things, we see the importance of knowing nature and how it connects to our Torah, and how it connects to the portion, and the messages we learn from this, and the daughters of Zlaf. Now these 5 daughters at the end, what was so important for them? It was so important for them for one thing, and that's to receive inheritance in the land of Israel. And which is really interesting, it's they were the daughters of, the Torah mentions, the daughters of Zlaf, who was the son of Chefer. Now, the Talmud in the Bava Batra says that they received the inheritance of their grandfather and their father as well. And the fact that the father was the firstborn, a double portion. So they got this big portion of inheritance. And not only that, we'll add to the fact that they had that azut, they had that special quality like their father did, to stick up for, to stand up for their rights. And that shows how much that father's quality was brought down to them. And that, as we see later on, when they inherit the land of Israel, so that was so important to inherit the land of Israel and to show the love of the land of Israel. And that all comes from their father in his name, and they continue that amazing thing. And it continues beautifully in the portion of Maseh, when it goes on later on, and Israel comes along and they say, if they end up marrying, after they inherit part of the land of the tribal portion of Menashe, but if they go ahead and marry in a different tribe, so they're going to lose, because their husbands will now have the land, in their family, so the tribal portion of land will be lost, and therefore they were told to maintain living within the boundaries of their tribe. And this is what the beautiful thing I said I found on the internet, which is really interesting, an article, how they knew their boundaries. Although they had the quality of the father, and to go ahead and push forward, but also they rectified the father by knowing when they have to put down the boundaries and know exactly when to say, okay, I'm going to accept it, I'm not going to push forward. Here we have to maintain our boundaries. And that really in reality is all about the desert. The desert is a makom of ifker, a place where there are no boundaries. And the whole concept of the Torah is to give us boundaries in our life. And to come to the land of Israel, we have particular borders, and we have to, on those borders, fulfill the land and the commandments that relate to the land, and all these things apply to the boundaries. So Tzlof Chad and their daughters teaches us this great lesson of what the boundaries of Torah are all about, and the boundaries of land. And this was a lesson, as I said, for all of Israel. Anyway, these are interesting ideas. I hope you enjoyed. Have a beautiful Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'nechama.